So allow me to introduce our first speaker. Richard is the co-founder and CEO for Asia of Lenddo, the world's first online platform that allows members to build their credits worth using their online social connections along with access to local financial services. Founded in 2011, the Lendo community now has over 500,000 subscribers or members in over 35 countries and was recently recognized by the World Economic Forum as one of the most innovative startups for its potential to transform the future of business and society. Before Lendo, Richard has more than 6 years management consultancy experience with a consulting firm across various industries and business functions in more than 8 countries. Richard has been known as one of the pioneers in the outsourcing industry in the Philippines, having successfully run 2 outsourcing companies in the form of Somersault and Infinite O. In addition, he is a director at British Chamber of Commerce Philippines and the European Chamber of Commerce Philippines. He received his bachelor's degree in management sciences from Warwick University in the United Kingdom. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our first speaker, Richard Eldridge.
Good evening, everyone.
Richard.
Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
Cool.
It's really a good turnout for this event. Realizing.
You don't make you.
Sorry?
It's you.
Oh, I think it's because of the speaker. Yeah.
You're free beer.
Yeah, the free beer pizza. And a while ago, I saw someone with like a Google Glass. I'm not sure if that's a Google Glass.
Yeah,
Yeah. So.
he's a man.
Yeah, we'll probably have photos with him later or photos with the Google Glass. Never mind the owner.
He's selling it for $3,000.
Wow. Anyways, let's go back. Let's go back to the subject of this talk, which is Lendo and then Richard Eldridge. Can you talk more about Lendo, how it started, and how you come up with the idea of Lendo?
Sure. So I've had the privilege of living in the Philippines for a number of years. I first came here in '95 and I left again, but I came back in 2001. And I've been involved, as Dustin said earlier, in the outsourcing industry. And I think there's always kind of a few lessons when you look back you can learn. But one of the things that was important to me when I kind of sold my first company and set up my second company and was growing it is I was working with a number of clients. And one of the clients is now the co-founder of Lendo, Jeff Stewart in New York. He's a serial tech entrepreneur. So I think the first lesson that I've kind of found is that whenever you're dealing with a client, he could become a partner of yours in the future. Really, when we first worked together, it was a real customer-supplier relationship, but we really got on well, and that's how the idea of Lendo started. I was in New York one night having a drink, as you do. And I was mentioning to him how we'd grown the outsourcing company, and we had over kind of 200 people at that stage. And it was amazing how many of them would come to me on payday and say, "Can I have a loan?" It's like, "You want a loan from me?" And these was kind of, we were doing some high-end outsourcing work. This was not a call center. So these people that kind of come from the best universities, they were doing really high-end transactions for a lot of financial institutions. So they were dealing with maybe $100,000 transactions for our clients. So my clients trusted them. I trusted them. But I was amazed why they came to me for money and they couldn't go to the bank. Because if you live in the US or the UK and you were 3-4 years out of college, you just go to the bank and they say, have money, have a credit card, and go and get it. So that led to kind of me and Jeff thinking about things and being curious about what was happening. So we decided to do about a year's research. And we put some interns at it, both in the US and the Philippines, and we really weren't sure what we would find. We were curious, which I think is the second thing. If you're curious and you've got a passion for something, go after it, check it out. And then they came back to us after a year, and we were expecting them to say, well, both of you are crazy. Most people still tell me I'm crazy, but they didn't. They came back and they said, there's some really interesting trends going on. And you may have just touched on the surface of something really big. The first thing is obviously the middle class in the Philippines is starting to grow. Yeah, it's becoming big and it's growing very quickly. But more than that, they then researched how the middle class was growing across many other countries in the world. And there are lots of developing countries, and the middle class are growing more and more in all of these countries, and they have a very similar profile. So that led us to say, hey, well, there's some scale here. This is not a problem just with my 200 employees at that time in my company. It's a Philippine issue, but it's also a global issue. And I think when I look back at what I've heard the VC say to me all the time, it's all about scale, scale, scale. And I see it in the tech kind of community here. Sometimes, we're quite myopic, and we need to think bigger and more global in nature. A lot of the time, if there's a problem that you encounter, it doesn't just impact you or the local community, it could impact the whole of the Philippines, the whole of Asia, and potentially the whole of the world. So always look how big you could become. It's amazing when you think about it. The next thing they said was, and we kind of knew this already, the middle class are all social and they're all mobile. Which kind of seems obvious, everyone's got a mobile phone. The social side was interesting, wherein we understood, Facebook was big and everything, but when we dug into the research, we found that the reason people go to the internet, if you're middle class in developing countries, is for social reasons. A lot of people in America go to the internet to research and to read the newspaper. That's not what happens in the middle class in developing countries. They go there to be social. They go to Facebook, they go to YouTube, they go to very different reasons. And obviously the Philippines usually hits the chart, the top of the charts on how many times they go to social sites, how long they spend there, the number of visits a month. You win everything. So that was kind of an interesting stat for it. And the third thing that became apparent is that all of these people across the world were underserved by the current financial institutions. So this doesn't mean at the bottom of the pyramid you have microfinance. I don't know how many of you know about microfinance, but that's serving the bottom of the pyramid. They're unbanked, so they have no bank account. And unfortunately in the Philippines today, 80% of people still don't have a bank account. You then have the top of the pyramid, which are kind of the AB, and they all have bank accounts, 2 credit cards, they're served very well. But then you have this middle sector that typically would be what we call underbanked. So underbanked, you might have an ATM card to get your payroll, but that's it. 50% of them would take 100% of their payroll out on the day of it. I'm not sure. How many of you take all of your money out of your ATM on your payroll day? Any of you? But that's why you're here. That's a good trend. So when you try and recruit someone, ask them to take all the money out. So that was one big trend. Secondly, very few of them had financial education. How many of you here have had financial education in your lives? Wow, 2. Very few, 3. We found that over 80% of people had never had any financial education. It was amazing. I mean, in the UK where I came, as early as 12, we were given financial education classes at school. So it was really kind of an amazing class. And then we found that the people who did have the financial education, they weren't particularly happy about it. Because if you type in financial education in Google in the Philippines, it comes out with 401k, which is an American term for retirement savings. So they said, well, even if I do have some financial education, the majority of it is not applicable to me. And the final thing they said on education was, I'm a millennial. I think differently. I don't want to sit in a class for 8 hours and be taught boring sums and T-charts and assets and liabilities. I want a fun way to learn. So that was one of the things in financial education. The other thing we found with the financial institutions, and this was probably our biggest finding, was in some countries they had credit bureaus. Obviously in all of the developed countries they had credit bureaus. In some developing countries they did, some they didn't. But whether you didn't, like in the Philippines, there is no credit bureau, or in some of the other countries we now operate in today, they do have a credit bureau. The same problem occurred, which is, credit bureaus work based on history. If you have no history, you don't have a score, or you have a very inaccurate score. So the majority of the middle class kind of live at home with their parents. They have a prepaid cell phone. They live in a cash economy. They've never had credit before, and as a result, there's no data on them. So it's very difficult to create an accurate credit score. So we said, well, this is a big problem. This is probably something that technology can solve. We're technologists. We said, well, how can you deploy technology to it? So that then led us to, well, how do microfinance do it then? Because they're doing this at the bottom of the pyramid in rural villages. And we found that there was basically a man on a motorcycle going to the village. 5, 6, or microfinance which is not quite as high as 5, 6. But he would go to the village, he'd interview the person, he'd interview the neighbor, he'd interview the friends and say, do you know this person? Is it a good person? And then
Break his leg.
break his leg. If they don't pay sometimes. But then say, not only do you know this person, but would you be willing to be linked, guaranteed? It actually, they don't usually use guarantees, but vouch for that person, and your ability to get a loan would be linked to their repayment. And that sounded really good, and we knew it was working not only in Bangladesh and India, but also in the Philippines. But we said, but it's so inefficient. We're techies. Why do you want to go on a motorcycle and go around to the village every week writing a manual receipt? We're like, we don't like that. So we said, we know that the middle class has this problem. We know there's the reason why the banks don't serve them, but they're all online. How about we try and deploy all of this, what microfinance does, but we put it online. So we created Lendo.com and then subsequently .ph and the other countries. And what we said was that we wanted to economically empower the middle class. So I think another big finding for us is we weren't saying we want to make lots of money. We have a fundamental vision and passion about what we do. We want to economically empower people. And we've segmented some of the market we think we can focus on. And we're kind of gung-ho about focusing on that. How do we do that? Well, we said we can create an online experience and we can allow people to join very simply. They should be able to connect their social media accounts, and then we will then calculate a credit score based on that. At that time, how did we know? We didn't know how to do it. We just said this is a huge idea, but we think technology exists out there to do this type of thing. The predictive nature of algorithms has been used in many other situations, not in this situation. But why can't it be used for a good purpose in this situation? So we allow people to join. They connect their social media accounts. We give them a score, and if their score is high enough, they can then apply if they need to for credit online, as well as access to other financial services. They can get education, and we can kind of deposit funds to their account, and they can get into the cycle of having more an inclusive financial system, and that's what we built up over the last 2 years.
You mentioned about the emerging middle class, right? Not having the credit worth because they don't have access to financial institutions. They can't borrow from major banks. Now, recognizing that there's opportunity in that aspect, but don't you think that the risk for you guys is just so high? And knowing that the risks are so high, how are you able to manage those risks?
So I think there's a few points behind that. So from the start, we didn't want to be a financial institution. Yeah, banks are banks, and they can do their part of it better than us. We see ourselves as a technology and big data player. Yeah, that we can provide things to them. However, when I went to the banks in 2011, and I went to most of the big banks here, which was the first country we set up, and I'm not going to name them, but in case, is anyone from a bank here? No. Okay, I'm safe. Okay. So I went to BDO, BPI, Metro Bank. Who are now our partners, by the way. But
That's actually captured by a video.
no problem.
Don't upload that to YouTube.
So I haven't said anything bad yet, so I can.
Still safe.
No, but they quite rightly said, we don't believe you. Yeah. They probably said I'm an alien, I'm crazy, like most people, as I said, do. But they said, come back to me when you've proven them all. So we decided that we would set up our own entity here that was legally allowed to lend the first few years to prove our algorithm. And that took about 1.5 years of training our algorithm sets. And then as of December last year, we've now been issuing loans based on our algorithm, and they've been outperforming humans. Going back to your original kind of question about, are there risks? Yes, obviously in the lending part of what we still do today is the data technology play, we have different risks. But of the lending play, what we looked at was some of the best practices that exist. So collateral, people say, well, you should take collateral. Well, what collateral does the middle class have? They don't have any. Yeah, that's the problem. If they all had something they could deposit, it would be easy to get funds. And there are a number of people that exist who say, yeah, if you put 2,000 peso in a bank account, I'll give you a loan of 2,000 peso. Why? Yeah, why? Exactly. There's not really any point.
Yeah.
So we're a strong believer in our business that your social reputation is your collateral. And moving forward in the future, that's going to be very, very important. So your social reputation is your collateral. What does that mean? So, and we're starting to see it a little bit now. Yeah. So, 85% of employers in the US now check LinkedIn accounts before they make an offer to an employee. And that's what's online in social networks. Yeah. So if someone says good about you or bad about you, or someone says nothing about you, it has some meaning. How many of you have kind of used Airbnb?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's ratings that you give.
Yep.
Right? Did those ratings have any impact on where you stayed? Or if you were renting a house out, you're seeing that social reputation. The reputation is being formed in very different ways now, and you can do it with shopping sites as well. You see it with eBay, where you have stars for the seller. You see it in hotels, where you can kind of see the ratings. There's a lot of interesting statistics coming out now about if you go to a specific Expedia or whatever the hotel site, and you see that they've got comments there. If they're all positive, actually people don't believe them. Yeah. If they're all negative, you don't want to go there. And they actually have found now that if there's a mixture of positive and negative, they see it kind of as the most realistic view of that hotel. But a big part is how you've responded to those negative comments as the hotelier. So kind of that's why we believe that in the future your social reputation will be important. That's number one. Number two, we think that we do use community and peer pressure as part of our reinforcement model, where you have to invite friends to Lendo and they have to vouch for you. Number two. And number three, we've created what we call the Lendo score, which is a score between 0 and 1,000. And that is your proxy credit score. We call it a credit worthiness score. And by doing that, and this is a long-term education process we're going through with people, but we're telling them that, realize that score is very important to you. This score, if you look after it and you do the right things, could be valuable not only today, if you want cash today potentially for credit, but it could be useful in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years time. So you've got to think about that. Think about how your actions today could impact your future. So that's the kind of the three areas we do to protect ourselves.
And then, how about the customer experience? How does a customer actually avail of a loan from Lendo?
So we do a lot of work, and we've definitely made mistakes in this area with kind of the UX of our site. Originally, we went down the route of web experience. We're now changing that and becoming a mobile-first company, and a company that's they will have an experience outside our website. So we've actually restructured our technology more recently and allowing us to now, through APIs, be present in many sites anywhere on the web if we need to. The experience, we try and I think there's two elements to this. We test everything. So by testing, that means not only A/B testing everything, we track metrics on everything, and then we also bring our members in every 2 weeks, and we do focus groups to really understand what they like and what they don't like. And we've had some amazing discoveries by doing that. I think we found generally by the whole process, and we do have, there is some friction we have in our business, and we're always going to have that creative tension, because from a user perspective, they just want to do something immediate. Yeah, and as much as we like to do that, we do have some challenges in our process working in developing countries that don't allow us to do that. You've probably heard of things like Wonga and Lending Tree in the US, where they can instantaneously put money into your account. It's not quite that easy in the Philippines. You don't have those payment gateways that exist. So you do see some of these challenges. But that's okay. I mean, we want to help the developing world. There's a lot of people who don't have any access, and we're giving them access. We're trying to improve it. We're working with our partners, the banks and other third parties, to make that better.
Let's talk about the 500,000 members you have. How was the journey? How did you arrive at that number? Was it difficult? And how long did it take you to actually reach that number?
Yes, we're just over 500,000 recently, so it's been a kind of 2.5 year journey for us. Is it difficult? I think everyone here as a startup understands it's difficult, yeah? I mean, we tackled a big problem, and we knew it was going to be hard, but I think perseverance is the key. The reason all of you are interested here is because you have a passion to do something. And if it was that easy, someone else would have done it. Yeah? And the fact that you keep pushing through all of the challenges you face, make a successful entrepreneur. I think that's probably one important point. We started slow, and I think that's one of the critical things. You have to test things. You have to build it, and then at a certain point, you have to say, where do I want to kind of start testing other scenarios? So to start with, it was a lot about the user experience, building our data for our training sets to build our algorithm. And that's the kind of the core. That's our secret sauce. And when we got to that and we started issuing loans based on our algorithm and it was outperforming the humans, we said, we have something else to prove now. And this was something that happened after we had received some funding, and they said, you tell us that there's this huge opportunity out there. You need now, number one, prove it's out there. But number two, prove that you can achieve that at scale at an acquisition cost which is attainable. Because in a lot of businesses you can say, yeah, I could grow to 1 million people. Now, some business grows to 1 million people very cheaply, but some it's very, very hard. And as you go past a certain mark, it gets very expensive to acquire those members. So we had to then turn our engine up and see how we could do that. And we've successfully over the last 6 months been able to kind of consistently grow our business at reduced cost, which is a really good kind of sign for us. We can continue to do that. But for the first few years we were quite quiet. You probably hadn't heard of us. Now a lot of people have seen us online, and we are very strong on kind of our digital presence, and we're continuing to grow fast.
And how much of these 500,000 is based here in the Philippines? I understand you have also you have members from outside the Philippines in South America, right? Other Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, so we started in the Philippines. The Philippines is still our biggest market today. It makes up about 65% of our members. We then, after about a 1.5 year operation, decided to go into Colombia in South America. And we've grown that, and more recently, about a 1.5 months ago, we entered Mexico. We're just starting up operations in Mexico. So and that's very young now. So we'll see where we go, but there's a plan in place, and we're looking to grow further. And then we get lots of people joining from all around the world. I think that's the interesting thing that all of you can find. If you're online, it's very easy to deploy things outside your local geographic region if you want to. And what we found is we don't offer all of them the same level of service now. Because obviously I can't give a loan to someone in America or Europe because I'm not based there and I don't have the license, but they can still have some of the experience. And the thing we're now looking at is, as mobile, and I'm sure some of you have mobile apps and stuff, it gets even easier to deploy across multiple countries much quicker. And that's the fun bit, and that's what's exciting about technology and how you can be so disruptive in today's age.
And what are the major lessons, and this is probably important for the startups here who would like to go regional or go global someday. What are the key lessons that you could share to them on scaling their businesses outside of the Philippines?
So I think it's a few points. The first one is to say you've got to be careful here. You've got to decide how deep you go in the first country versus scaling in another country, because you've got to prove your model works and you go deep within one country. So don't feel that you have to rush and go into another country. Lendo maybe was a slightly different. We had to have a slightly different reason behind doing that, but be careful. Don't scale too quickly. Find your product market fit first. Make sure you've proven that model out, and then get ready to scale. I think the important thing I found is from very early on, understand, is there a global market? Is there a regional market? Are there other countries you could operate in? You don't need to be there, but you need some facts and figures and be able to be pretty knowledgeable about that early on in the process. Because that gives you a good indication how big you can become. And then as you go through the various phases, you can then decide at what point you decide to turn on that and look at another country when it's right. It's going to be different for everyone.
And in your case, when did you decide to open a Colombian shop and a Mexican shop?
So Colombia was interesting. So everyone says, why Colombia?
Yeah.
They have great coffee. They don't have much drugs now, I should say. But they are in the World Cup, yeah, and I think they're going to do quite well. So one of the things we had was, so this whole idea of building an algorithm that could predict creditworthiness is a real cool concept. Everyone really likes it. The bankers don't believe you, but it kind of sounds really good. And one of the things that obviously was part of our detailed analysis was the culture of the Filipino. And some of the culture that we felt would make this work. So one of the challenges we had was not so we had proved we could acquire people, we could get applications, people could connect social media, we had ticked off lots of things in the boxes. But one of the things we had, and we had set off really clear milestones very early on. After a year, we want to achieve these 5 things. After 2 years, we need to achieve these 5 things, for example. And one of the things we were coming to in about 9 months' time was we have to start thinking about, how do we prove that this can work in more than just the Philippines? It's not just that Filipinos are so different from any other country in the world that this would work. And that was when we made the decision we'd have to go to another country. So we started looking at other countries, what made sense. We ended up after we have kind of a checklist of potential countries we go to. How big is the middle class? How socially connected are they? Are they underbanked? And we kind of shortlisted it to probably 20 countries in the world that we felt. And then we zoomed in further and felt that South America was a good market to go to for a number of reasons. We then looked at the South American market and shortlisted it to 3 countries. Excuse me. And selected Colombia after kind of more analysis and finding a great person who used to be the number 2 in Google South America to run. And he was based in Colombia. So he made the final decision for us to be there, but it was down to 3 countries at that time.
Right at the core of your startup is the strong algorithm, the predictive nature of whether a person is going to pay or not. How easy was it to find a developer, I don't know, here in the Philippines or elsewhere? How easy was it to find really good developers to develop your algorithm? Is it
let me ask you 2 parts. So in terms of, most of our development is here in the Philippines. The data science team is not here in the Philippines. We looked and found we could not, number 1, find a head of data science here. And number 2, there wasn't a deep bench of data scientists. There's a lot of scientists here, there's a lot of kind of mathematicians, statisticians. We eventually looked globally for this role and said, where is the best place in the world we can find these people to do this role? And actually our data science team is made up of a number of different skill sets within kind of the remit of data science and big data. We eventually selected New York. New York is not the cheapest place in the world. Well, actually, when you look at it in the depth of what we're growing into a global business, it made sense. A lot of people say, why aren't you in Silicon Valley? Well, I'm competing with Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. Yeah. On the East Coast, it's interesting. You have a lot of these algorithmic experts that used to be working for the financial institutions. In 2008, they had trouble and they started letting go of them. They blamed a lot of them for the crisis. And a lot of these people wanted to move out of that. So there is actually quite a nice pool of data scientists there, and our team is now headed up by a PhD in neuroscience. He heads our team up. And then we have an amazing group of other individuals. One won the Maths Olympics of India, for example. Great team of different people, some young guys who kind of come up with all these and train all our data.
And let's talk about investment raising. Just recently, you were able to close a $6 million round, right? And I believe Kickstart, Christian, they're one of your investors.
Correct.
Right? And prior to that,
Very expensive.
yeah,
Good value. See, this is
value.
ignore the investors, yes. Good value. That's what they look for. Yeah.
And previously, you were able to raise $1 million, right? And one of your lead investors is Omidyar Network, which is
Correct.
the owner is owned by the founder of eBay or Amazon. Yeah. Anyways, what were the challenges that you've encountered in raising these funds? And we're talking here already in the millions. And how difficult or easy was it to convince a VC in this type of unsexy type of market, which is lending?
Unsexy?
Yeah. Well, the sexy, in my definition, the sexy startups would be in the lines of dating, in the lines of social media, right?
Sure. So I think we've been through a few phases, and I think people look for different things at different parts of that. the different kind of evolution of your business. So early on, we didn't go to the VCs. Yeah, we raised some promissory notes for some individuals. Some of those individuals were in the unsexy financial space, as you call it. And these were people, interestingly, that from around the world that really saw there was an opportunity here. And we pitched the idea at that stage. Typically, you pitch the idea, it can scale, and the management team. Those are the three things you pitch at the first stage. You can't pitch anymore. And then you can make some numbers on the back of an envelope and project that out. But really, they believe, do you want to do something? Is there a vision there? Is it scalable with the management team? As we move forward, we started building out those models and really seeing where it could take us. And we felt at that stage it was worth going to some of these VCs. And I guess the challenge we faced was, and it's probably easier for a lot of people in the room, that we see ourselves in the middle of three different kind of spaces. We see ourselves as, they call it fintech, so financial and technology. Financial, the boring, the tech, the cool, and then the developing countries. And very few people understand fintech developing. Yeah, a lot of people would understand two of those circles and invest in two of those circles, but very few of them understand all three. So we came across, and a lot of it's hard work. Connections, give you introductions, you have pitches, you talk to them. and eventually we were able to close out a great combination of VC